In the year 1989, a 23-year-old Cole Needham was on a forum board from one of the most primitive stages of the public internet, about to make the most important choice of his entire life. Cole's about to make a post by the name of Those Eyes, in which he'll address which actresses he believes to have the most attractive eyes. Here's a picture of him with his friends in the year 2002. Without any extra information, which person do you think he is? I'll give you a moment to decide. If you guessed this fucking guy, you'd be correct. I'd also accept if you guessed this guy. You can laugh. Cole will dab away his tears with his $50 million in net worth, because this dumb, potentially misogynistic post would soon become the inspiration for the 43rd largest website in the US, now known as IMDb. The concept of the site is simple. IMDb is an easily accessible place to rate and see ratings of media. That's both the source of beauty and undignified terror for this website. It's not a movie database. It's an internet movie database. And anyone with internet access, no matter how unintelligent, racist, or pedantic, is given a platform where they have the illusion that their opinion is of any value. This website has been here for 30 years now, and you still can't name me even one famous reviewer on it. Yet at the same time, it is still the #1 place our society goes to find out if something is good, because somehow, statistically speaking, it makes more sense to trust the opinion of 100 complete idiots than to listen to one competent and paid professional reviewer. Cole Needham created a madhouse where absolutely nobody has to take responsibility for their actions, and we all just trust it, despite the fact that these strangers have done nothing to earn our trust. Despite the fact that we're going to this website because we recognize and admit that we don't know what we want, and we have no reason to believe that people we don't know will be much better. Despite the fact that we don't know their biases, or whether they live in their parents' house, or even their age. Despite its everything, it has 168 million visitors every month who go there because they trust it. When I started researching this website, I assumed I already knew what I would find. That people are idiots and that they don't know what they want. I only ended up being half right. People are idiots, but when you have enough of them screaming at the top of their lungs, they'll paint a perfect image of what makes a TV show great. It ends.
Do I use IMDb? Everyone uses IMDb, don't they?
I'm addicted.
You're addicted?
There have been 233,413 different TV shows and 5,321,574 episodes to have ever been entered into the Internet Movie Database. Now, while admittedly those sound like pretty large numbers, keep in mind that that doesn't necessarily represent how many of these shows have substantial opinion data surrounding them. In fact, the majority of them don't even have as many as 5 ratings to their name. Now, how is that possible? Anyone on the internet could leave an opinion, right? You're telling me that more than half of all shows are completely undocumented? Yes, at first glance this seems like a total discrepancy, and it is the biggest flaw on the site. But at the end of the day, this actually isn't a terrible thing, because the basis of the issue actually makes perfect sense. IMDb is only 30 years old. Now, that's not exactly a short time. I mean, it's been around longer than I have, and it still generates itself plenty of credibility. But it does end up meaning that a good number of shows that predate the site are inadvertently misrepresented or not represented at all. For example, the finale of the hit TV show MASH is the only episode of its 251 episode run to have even 800 individual ratings for the show on the site. In fact, that finale was watched live by 106 million households, a record that stood for the most viewed single broadcast for 27 years straight. However, if IMDb was the only reason that you even knew the show existed, it's pretty unlikely you'd have any idea that was the case. On top of that, being a TV show that started, or worse, ended before the site got popular, means that the show's rating is almost explicitly going to represent people's opinions on how well the show has aged, with little to no padding from the people who would have given the show raving reviews in the year 1983 as they were still being aired. There are definitely other flaws with the site, which I won't spend time addressing in depth, because you've been so patient so far, and I am very proud of you. So just make sure that you remember that because this database hasn't been around since the inception of television, the data that we do have on public opinion is decidedly skewed towards representing a more modern society. I'll remember it with you. I kind of had to, as I documented every single episode of television with at least 800 votes. Okay, big chart. What do I need to say? There was some... yeah. I chose 800 votes as my baseline because I noticed that a number of modern shows that I perceived to be culturally relevant, particularly cartoons, were being excluded when I set the minimum higher. But this is it. 18,586 TV episodes in one place. When I first saw this, my initial realization was that it was shaped like a bell curve. But I also noticed that the bell curve was actually shifted pretty far from a perfectly halfway rating of 5.5, which struck me as odd, but that actually checks out. It's a perfect example of votership bias. For example, if you eat at a restaurant, that's one thing. Everybody will do that. It's not special. But the only reason anyone would leave a review on Yelp is either because it was the best thing they'd ever eaten, or because they saw a rat walking around and got salmonella. Same thing with IMDb. Except unlike a Yelp page, the ratings trend very positively. Because if your first impression of a new TV show is anything less than absolutely entrancing, you aren't likely about to come back for even more of it. Whereas, if you loved it, you're a part of the show's fan base now, and you'll definitely be coming back to rate more episodes. Additionally, if you're anything like me, you probably feel gross giving the first episode of The Queen's Gambit a 6 out of 10, even though that's what it deserves, despite the fact that that's still an actively positive rating. These kinds of silent external pressures, among others, ended up making the most common rating in my dataset an 8.2 out of 10, which 1,311 episodes have. The average for all the episodes together comes out to a slightly lower 8.17, which, all things considered, is still pretty damn good. I should also point out that although I highlighted them in pink for visibility, there are no episodes of television in the sample that have a rating of 3, 2, 1, or 10. None of these are particularly shocking. The first three because they're multiple standard deviations away from the mean. 4s are also rare, there's only 3 of those. This is because usually if something starts being unenjoyable, people will stop caring about it long before it gets bad enough to warrant a 3 or a 4, and it simply wouldn't have the 800 reviews it needs to qualify for my dataset. As for there being no 10s, that just requires you to think logically, because we're talking about the internet. And having people perfectly agree on anything is absolutely unequivocally impossible when you have distinctive groups of people who will disagree because it's fun to be loud. In fact, there's only 26 episodes to claim the next best thing with a 9.9. You can pause the video if you'd like. See how many shows you can guess. Nine shows have just one episode on the list. Chernobyl, Person of Interest, Hannibal, Code Geass, Avatar The Last Airbender, Vinland Saga, Demon Slayer Kimetsu no Yaiba, BoJack Horseman, and 6 Feet Under. Being that half of those are animes, I'd argue that the genre might also be a victim to some pretty heavy votership bias for a similar reason to the one I mentioned before. Anime is undoubtedly niche, and if you're even mildly disinterested in the food anime serve, you're not coming back to their restaurant. That simply can't be said about live-action shows, however. because they're aimed at pretty much every age group and personality type. So even if a person hates one, that will rarely turn them away from live action altogether. That's not to say that these aren't absolutely amazing pieces of television. I mean, I'm sure that they are, but I wouldn't be shocked to see a number of these episodes knocked down a peg or two if they were seen by a larger group. Shows with 2 episodes with a 9.9 include Breaking Bad and Mr. Robot, which, if you've seen them, that shouldn't surprise you. And Star Wars The Clone Wars apparently had a phenomenal ending because the last 3 episodes are back-to-back-to-back 9.9s, which, mind you, is especially impressive when you consider that together, that comes out to the length of a full movie. Game of Thrones has 4, but our apparent leader, by brute force, is Attack on Titan, with 6 episodes as of right now. It's one thing if a niche gets together and decides that some particular episode was exceptional. That isn't an impossibility. But a show doesn't just stumble across multiple. Even niches can have incredible disparity between their opinions. Attack on Titan represents more than 1/5 of all of the 9.9s. In fact, this show arguably isn't even niche. It's one of the top 80 most reviewed shows on the entire site, with 195,000 series ratings. It cannot be simply and entirely explained away by votership bias. No, not Attack on Titan. I say this with no bias. I've never seen an episode of it, and as of writing this script, I could not even tell you the plot. But objectively, this show is one of the most spectacular achievements the medium of television has ever seen. Alright, everyone's buckled? Good. Let's take a look at just how impressive this is. First, I want to point out that the way I've structured this video so far was actually deliberate. I introduced you to individual episode ratings first because there's actually a second and much more common way that people tend to review the series that they watch, which is just going to the IMDb page for their favorite show and leaving a generalized review for the entire series. It's this score that IMDb will advertise pretty much anywhere else on the site where that show might appear, but I've come to realize that it's actually incredibly inaccurate. People are just not that good at remembering how much they liked something. Don't believe me? Here's Chernobyl. It is phenomenal, and people recognize it, giving the TV miniseries a 9.4 out of 10. Here's what they rated the 5 episodes. Not even one of these has a rating lower than 9.5. This series was 5 episodes long, and people still couldn't compute what they felt about this show. Or any others for that matter. So I did it for them. Chernobyl's average episode rating, or AER as I'll be calling it, is an even more remarkable 9.62 out of 10, which is far and away the highest for any TV show on the entire site. In fact, it's exceedingly rare for a TV show to even have an AER over 9. I could only find 17 such shows. I mean, think about it. If you make an episode of television that gets exactly 10 votes, 9 of which are 9.0s, and 1 of which is a 1.0, that episode's rating is an 8.2 out of 10, despite all of the nice people who gave those 9.0s. You need enough exceptional votes to counteract people who even thought it was just okay. Now that's bad and hard enough as it is. But in order to have an average episode rating of 9 or higher, you're running a fucking gauntlet. For as long as your show lives, you pretty much cannot miss. Close to half of your episodes have to earn a 9 or higher, and those that don't can't be far off, or you're almost definitely never recovering. Disclaimer. We actually don't know exactly how votes are weighted on IMDb. They keep it this way intentionally, and that's good. IMDb calls it a preventative measure to disable vote bombing, which, in English, roughly translates to, our customer base is terrible, and anything we teach them can and will be used against us. Basically, if every account's opinions were exactly equal, there would be nothing stopping the same people from creating multiple accounts to say that a particular thing was especially good or especially bad. But because they have a secret weighted measurement system, they prevent their scores from being highly inaccurate. Even with this system, it's still incredibly difficult. And to help you visualize just how difficult, let's take a look at some examples of the most voted on whole number out of 10 episodes on the site. I feel like the title's pretty self-explanatory. Anyhow, look. For this 6 out of 10 episode of Black Mirror, here's the voter distribution. You'll see that there's actually more people who voted that it was a 7 than a 6, and more people who voted that it was an 8 than a 5. Despite that, it's completely negated by the 1 out of 10 votes, which still brought it down to a 6. Love, Death, and Robots has over 60% of its votes on this episode as a 7 or lower, minimizing the impact of the stuff above it, making it a 7. A similar trend is seen in an 8, but with the votes shifted upwards. However, when we finally hit a 9, the shape changes. That's because suddenly the high ratings have to negate the numbers significantly below it. Getting a 1 out of 10 is far more devastating for a show that has a high rating than it is for a show that has a 2 out of 10. There's just more to lose. Let that sink in. If a show has an AER over 9, they have to have more than half of their episode ratings to look like this. Better than this, actually. Enough to make up for any 8.8 or 8.3 or 7.8, whatever. This graph, with 61.7% of its votes being absolutely perfect, is a whole point away from a 10 out of 10. So what shows could possibly maintain a level of standard above this? What on earth could possibly qualify for this list of the elite? I've already told you that Chernobyl wins this race, but what makes its performance even more notable is that the show's premiere is the highest rated premiere I could find for any show. A 9.5. There's already only 458 other episodes in my data with a rating that high or better, but Chernobyl got this score on a pilot episode, which are notoriously met with extremely unfavorable ratings. The first episode is always difficult to write. You have to establish the plot, the setting, any characters you want me to meet, the pacing, the struggle. It's just a lot for an episode that's usually no longer than any other. However, that's not even the worst part, because you're also showing this to the most critical audience you possibly could. An audience you haven't won over yet. I haven't done a lot of research specifically on first episodes, but you're gonna have to take my word for it. From my 9 months of researching shows in general, pilot episodes that earn a 9, or anything higher, are exceedingly rare. That being said, 13 of the 17 titles with an AER over 9 do have them. They kind of had to. Okay, I'll show you them. Let me turn them on. Here they are. Technical difficulties, I'm sorry. It'll just be a moment. Hello? Whoops. I'm so sorry, Mittens. There's something wrong with that box. We'll talk about it later. I bet you're seeing a couple of titles you wouldn't have guessed. That's okay. I hadn't heard of TVF Pictures before I made this either. Apparently, it's an Indian comedy miniseries. As a matter of fact, 8 of these shows are miniseries or documentaries. Now, what I'm about to say might be a little bit controversial, but in my eyes, making one of those is slightly easier. For documentaries, you still have plenty to do right, everything from acting to lighting, but your story is given to you. If you're greenlit on making a show about it, it's already interesting. For miniseries, don't fuck up. You have 5 episodes, say what you need to say, keep it concise, and we can love it. Regardless, they're still on the list, and they are masterpieces by every stretch of the imagination, no matter how short they may be. You've probably forgotten, because I've gone on many tangents, but the point I've been trying to make is that most shows are capable of being good. Hell, they can even have a couple of phenomenal episodes if the community is willing to come together and agree on it. But to be consistently great is just not something most shows can or will do in their run. Attack on Titan unconditionally has, and its 6 9.9s can't be explained away on the premise that it's a niche type of animation, or that it just has an especially rabid fan base. As I've stated, even fandoms dissent. There just isn't an excuse I would accept to explain away how incredibly the show has performed. They have made 79 episodes so far. That's 79 opportunities for them to make a miscalculation that the fans don't like, and they just haven't. It just hasn't missed, regardless of geographic or demographic. Again, I've never watched it, but as the rest of the world does, it's becoming increasingly clear. Attack on Titan is objectively one of the most impressive works ever created. But this box just didn't fix itself, did it? We let it be for a while, but I don't think it's coming back. Which is a shame, really, because before it broke, it had everything going for it. It's a show that could have been here. It should have been here. I'm lying. I wish it should have been here, but instead, it will lie forever dormant. A ghost box, representing what once was. It's both my great pleasure and extreme pain to tell you. It is. You might remember the outcry a couple years back for the final season of Game of Thrones. Hell, even I remember some of the complaining, and this was back in 2019 when I was still one of those white guys who had only watched The Office. I watched the show's run in its entirety last year, cautiously assuming that it was just entitled jerks doing most of the screaming, that the majority still appreciated it. Now that I've seen it, I desperately wish I could say it was that it still had parts that made it worth watching, that the finale was acceptable. But I have to accept it. One of the best shows I've ever seen has the single most painful season of a television show I have ever made myself watch. Alright, let's take a look. What's the average episode rating for your first 7 seasons, Game of Thrones? Oh my god. And you've maintained that for how many episodes so far? Wait. How has your viewership been? Okay. Any awards won that we should be aware of? Holy shit. Clearly you're quite good at this. Well, I trust your judgment. You're doing one last 6-episode season. Go ahead. Do your worst. Holy fucking shit. How did you do that? In just 6 short hours of content, Game of Thrones erases the legacy of its previous 67 in one fell swoop. It goes from a 9.06 to an 8.83, squashing 0.23 of its rating. People were furious. Alright, listen up, creators and storytellers. I am going to teach you how to ruin anything. If you listen closely and take real good notes, you too can master the art of disappointing. It's just a 2-step process, a hard part and an easy part. Step 1 is the hard part. Establish characters, plots, setting, motives, etc., until you finally have a fully fledged universe. Step 2, stop doing the hard part. If you set up rules, or morals, or motivations for a character or universe, and you go against it, we see that. We have always seen that. We will never stop seeing that. That's why it's such a great way to disappoint people. Do this, and you'll finally become a master of destruction like your favorite show, Game of Thrones. Without spoiling anything, I will tell you exactly what they did wrong. Game of Thrones never missed a beat for 67 hours of content, establishing and ending stories only where they needed to be through an extension of some of the best acting, writing, set design, camera work, you name it, that the world has ever seen. I stand by that. But as great as it was, it took less than 6 hours to take the characters that they had spent years masterfully and precisely moving around in the story to completely override where they were supposed to be. The writers shat themselves. And despite the very best efforts of everyone else working on the show, there was nothing they could do to make the story not sound like bullshit. Don't get me wrong, it's quite clear that everyone else did try. One of the episodes of the last season took 55 nights to shoot in its entirety. The writers just did not hit their mark. And now, for the rest of time, their legacy as a show is forever tarnished, and the site won't forget it. I still actively recommend this show, and I can say easily, without the slightest doubt, that it has provided some of the most compelling television I have ever watched. But if you're powerful enough to stop yourself, call Season 7 the finale. IMDb warns, I and the rest of the users wish that the final season never came at all. I'll briefly bring to your attention that Game of Thrones actually isn't the most impressive display of a show shooting itself in the foot, at least from a numbers standpoint. You might be able to guess which one. This will serve as a warning for anyone hiring pedophiles. Don't do that. Or do it, I guess. I mean, this was the first original online-only television series to receive major Emmy nominations, and I've seen people credit the show for doubling Netflix's subscriptions. Either way, Kevin Spacey was undeniably the main character. They killed him off screen to remove his association with the show, and then had 8 episodes where they had no narrative, with the best episode getting a 4.4, and the worst episode getting a 2.5. All 8 of those episodes are in the bottom 40. It cost their AER more than half a point. Financially, they'll survive, but it's a stain that they'll forever live with. A 2.5 is pretty bad, but for my sample of over 18,000 episodes, it's not the worst. It's the 7th worst. The real worst goes to a Saudi Arabian show named 6 Windows into the Desert for its episode The Rat. I've watched it twice for this video. It's on Netflix pretty much everywhere, and it has English subtitles. It's a 10-minute video filled with imagery, or at least that's probably what the director thought. It has a bad fight scene, and it didn't make a whole lot of sense, but I don't agree with its rating. The camera work was well done, the lighting was fine, and given that the actors didn't have a lot to work with, they did okay. I'd give it maybe a 3 instead. I was thoroughly entertained as I tried to figure out what on earth was happening. Give it a shot too, assuming that you're interested. And I've already told you about the highest rated episodes, right? These ones. This one's my favorite. I love BoJack Horseman. Here's a picture of me wearing a sweater. I guess I've run out of things to Wait. Am I missing something? Hello? A 10 out of 10. Is that you? Breaking Bad. Ozymandias. The only episode of television to keep a perfect rating of a 10 out of 10. Note that I do use the word keep. There are a number of shows that have held 10 out of 10s for a short while. In truth, right now, there are actually 2 episodes on the site with a 10. The second of which is, yet again, Attack on Titan. That show is unstoppable. Shows that typically earn this rating will hold it for a couple of days, maybe weeks, occasionally months. It's not the most surprising thing. Fans will see it, think it's the best thing ever, then the rest of society will watch it with the furrowed eyebrows of somebody's dad saying, "You haven't done anything yet, but I'm unsatisfied in advance." And then the rating will drop a little bit. It's hard to keep track of exactly what's happened before, especially because the Internet Wayback Machine doesn't keep track of every single part of a website every day. I had to go off of screenshots and forum posts, but these are what I could find. If there are ones I'm missing, go ahead and tell me in the comments. I'll also mention that for a couple of days after the debut of the 4th season of Attack on Titan, this episode kept flickering from a 10 and a 9.9. It won't stick. This is the We Are Number 1 episode. Good job, Internet. But Ozymandias has been out for 7 years now. The Internet, despite itself, has decided that this is not a fluke. It's the 7th most voted on episode on the entire site. Ozymandias has stood the test of time as a flawless 10 out of 10 for 7 years now. You could look at this one of 2 ways. The internet, the same internet that collectively named a $200 million polar research vessel Bodie McBoatface just made another probably bad decision, or realized that the internet, which we know is a hate-fueled shit pile that can't agree on anything and will act on spite more times than not, just set all of that aside to say that this is the greatest episode of television to have ever been created. Remember when I showed you what a 9.0 out of 10 looks like vote-wise? How 77% of its votes were a 9 or 10, and it still just barely qualified for what it did? I won't hold out on you. Here's what the best episode of television looks like. 91% of everyone who saw it said it was the greatest thing possible. I'm a part of that 91%. Not that it mattered, obviously. I was just one of 111,000 people who thought that. Nobody's opinion is going to change this rating. And believe me, some have tried. Hilariously, the second most common rating for the best episode of all time is a 1, which is absolutely criminal. Anytime you rate something a 1 out of 10, you're saying that there was absolutely nothing redeemable. I could accept the people who gave the episode a 4 out of 10, however much I may disagree. That at least means that they gave a fair trial and gave credit where credit was due. But a 1 out of 10? Dude, you didn't like the story? Didn't believe any of the performances? Thought the lighting was bad and the camera work was abysmal? Nothing? Oh. You're upset and fighting a war on Breaking Bad fans. Good thing you left an opinion. It doesn't matter. 1,000 of him wouldn't matter. But usually when you hear videos on statistics with big numbers, they represent a chance or a likelihood of something happening. When I say that this episode of Breaking Bad is one of over 5 million on the site, it's not me citing the odds of this scenario happening. There's no way for me to cite those odds. But you need to realize that teams of people worked together on every single one of those 5 million episodes and did their best to make it something that an audience would want to see. Many of them succeeded. I'm absolutely sure of it. But only one of those teams managed to create something so compelling, so inexplicably stunning that nobody could deny that it was, in fact, perfect. Breaking Bad made the only 48 minutes of perfect television that the world has ever seen. As I mentioned, only 2 years ago, I was one of the people that had only ever watched The Office. I'm still catching up on a lot, but among the things that I have caught up on, Breaking Bad is my favorite serial drama. Naturally, of course, you can't just get a 10 out of 10. If people aren't already invested in your story, they won't feel attachment to your characters. They need to be invested. Approximately this invested. Here's a bar graph of the voter distribution of every single episode of Breaking Bad. 30 of these 62 episodes are 9.0s or higher. That's only one less than half. They were just serving hit after hit after hit. The last season kicked so much ass that all but 3 episodes weren't. And those 3 episodes that weren't were all literally 8.9s, of which the show had 8. In fact, what even is their worst episode? Oh. Yeah, I hate that episode. Look, for a 23 episode streak, Breaking Bad did not have a single episode rated lower than an 8.9. And only after 20 episodes of build-up that was this precisely constructed did it earn television's first and only perfect episode. It's for this reason that I don't think it will ever happen again. Too much had to go right. But Breaking Bad is another perfect example of what society wants. Vince Gilligan, the creator, had worked on The X-Files before this, a show which he's repeatedly gone on record saying he felt had gone on for too long. It was an influence for Breaking Bad because of it. Vince Gilligan knew what he wanted to say, he said it, and even though the viewership for the show was actively going uphill all the way until the end, finished right where he planned he would. Despite cries for a new season, despite becoming one of the most critically acclaimed shows, He simply realized he cared more for the legacy than anything else. You do not want another season of your favorite show. Everyone thinks they do. They're wrong. Hell, even networks know that this is the case, but unfortunately the potential revenue they generate outweighs their desire for a glowing legacy. This is actually a very difficult thing to prove with numbers because oftentimes the episode rating and the viewership don't directly correlate with one another, which would mean that I can't just say, people aren't watching this anymore, and as you can see, it's because it sucks. Ha ha ha, okay, thanks for watching. It's not a cause and effect relationship because most shows don't markedly get worse in a heartbeat. That isn't to say it's never obvious. You can definitely look at a graph of The Office and say, oh, look, Michael left. Yeah, people didn't like that, did they? Or, wait, they had a 9th season after their main character left in what could have easily been a season finale? Why did Scrubs do that? Despite the fact that the connection between these two lines isn't so obvious for most shows, one repeated pattern I did notice is that the viewership for shows almost always ends up in the shape of some sort of bell curve. Quick detour. IMDb has a list of their self-proclaimed top 250 TV shows, which I used for a while before realizing that their list was actually not a great representation of what you'd think of for TV culture. For example, David Attenborough's documentaries are on this list 8 fucking times. And sure, he's great, but I guarantee you there is nobody on this green earth who will tell you that their favorite entertainer is David. They're documentaries with David Attenborough. It's not like anyone would ever say, this is the worst thing I've ever seen. If somebody is leaving a review on his work, it's probably a positive one. Other shows on this list are offensive because they'll have as few as 5,000 series votes and also somehow are on this list to represent the very best things that we've seen. We clearly haven't seen them. On top of that, once again, the thing that decides the order of this top 250 list is that general series rating that I've been avoiding in the first place. So I decided to make my own list by searching the site with my own parameter. I think it's fair to say that in order for this list to represent the true top 250 on a website designed to share the general consensus, the list should have a minimum number of opinions required in order to be a valid entry. I decided that that number should be 40,000 series votes. I was okay using series votes in this case because it merely served as a measurement of how many people were invested enough in the show to leave an opinion. But why 40,000? Because I refused to accept that the Filthy Frank show on YouTube was the second greatest thing to ever happen. It also filtered out a good number of shows that maybe weren't as prominent in pop culture, like documentaries and Indian dramas with less than 300 votes per episode. Anyhow, I took my new top 250 shows, listed all of their episode ratings in chronological order, and for any of the shows with at least 40 episodes of completed viewership data, I made a black graph. One thing you should note about these black graphs is that I made them with wizard magic so that they were easier to read. Data for both viewership and ratings are super sporadic and hard to look at, so I took the averages. For example, the last episode of Game of Thrones is a 4. You know that. But if I plotted the highest highs and the lowest lows on all of these graphs, there would be so much going on that it would just be impossible to make anything of it. Instead, I took the average of the previous 5 episodes at every point on each graph, which instead equates to 6.12, which you see here. You should be aware, however, that the company that tracks the viewership data, Nielsen, has a couple of flaws. It's all based on people that they know are viewing a show live, so people have questioned the accuracy of the data as a whole. It's US based, which means that I don't have the viewership data for foreign shows, such as an anime. Netflix shows are also apparently a sore spot because Nielsen, as hard as they try, just have not been able to figure them out, and Netflix chooses to hold its cards pretty close to its chest. Other shows just simply had some pretty unstable data, and I played the my best judgment card to say that the viewership would have been pretty misrepresentative because episodes of the data were absent, or there was some other thing that just made it not right. Despite all of this, the data is still pretty trustworthy, and you can take my word for it, or the word of the multi-billion-dollar companies who depend on Nielsen's data to choose which shows are worth buying ad slots for. It's the most accurate source that we have, and it is still going to show a perfectly clear picture for viewership trends. Before I officially leave this detour, I would like to point out that even if I had been able to include all of these shows, the 13 foreign shows, the 6 that are streamed, and the 31 others I excluded for alternative reasons, I just barely would have as many shows with more than 40 episodes as I had with fewer. I made a list of 250 culturally recognizable TV shows that society has decided are our best representations of fantastic media, and they have declaratively stated that their very favorite stuff is that which they've had the least of. We're officially off the detour now. I made these graphs to help my point. The majority of these shows show little to no correlation between the episode ratings and the viewership for TV shows, so what gives? I can't think of a better illustration for my point than the most obvious and gradual decline from what is, coincidentally, arguably the greatest sitcom of all time. Let's be honest. The only time you ever hear about The Simpsons is when people are talking about who has the longest running series of all time. It's incredibly sad that that's the biggest compliment we can give it now, because there was a period of time where there was more than that. A period of time where The Simpsons transcended television. It had so violently exploded with success that other stations misinterpreted it as a public cry for primetime animation and then scrambled to create their own. Then when they failed, assumed that The Simpsons was a fluke for adults and that it wasn't supposed to happen. Even the creators were shocked. A time when Bart Simpson was the second most common write-in candidate behind Mickey Mouse. 74% of American teens could tell you Bart's hometown when only 41% could tell you the 3 branches of government. This show made $2 billion in its first 14 months from merchandise alone. Do you have any idea how much money $2 billion is? They were selling as many as 1 million shirts a day. But the excitement was well placed. The showrunners were very adamant about having their characters be people first and comedians second, which grounded the show in reality and made every punchline count that much more. This show is often cited as the reason that modern television doesn't use laugh tracks because it proved to executives everywhere that people didn't need to be told when to do so. And they didn't even exclude it as a statement. They just did it because they'd run out of time if they paused for every joke they fit in. You'd be hard-pressed to find an animated TV show whose creator does not cite The Simpsons as a source of inspiration. To this day, it is the only show I have ever pirated. Yet no one my own age knows how awesome this show once was. In case you are my age, and I piqued your interest, I'll share a secret life hack with you. If you're about to start watching a comedy but have difficulty getting into them, don't. Just start at the beginning of the 3rd season. For dramas, this usually won't work, but because most comedies are generally episodic and not impacted by previous episodes, I found you can just skip to the 3rd season, which is usually when the show is in its prime, and there usually aren't too many repercussions for circling back around to the 1st season if you really need more. To get a good look at how immediately successful The Simpsons was upon its initial airing, let's take a look at its viewership in comparison to maybe something a little bit more familiar. Here's our good friend The Office. These two shows are particularly good choices to analyze for immediate impact, because both just happen to avoid the biggest external forces the data could have misrepresented. The Simpsons fortunately predates digital video recorders by 9 years, so its data will be especially accurate because Nielsen can only count live, broadcasted viewership it gets on any given day, which DVRs may have negated. As for The Office, the show aired just barely as Netflix was starting to transition from a DVD rental company into a streaming service, meaning that people weren't expecting to just stream the show later. Remember, right now my goal is to show you how instantaneously The Simpsons took off, so you can appreciate just how slowly and painfully it declined. The Office, love it or hate it, has undeniably been a fantastic success. It ran for an incredibly solid 188 episodes, which happened over the course of 9 seasons, and even after it stopped airing those new episodes, continued to watch its fan base grow, until it was pulled off of Netflix and moved over to a different streaming service that no one had or cared about. You're probably also wondering what the hell this anomaly is. That's the episode Stress Relief, which happened to get an amazingly high 22,910,000 viewers out of nowhere. There are two potential factors for why this happened. The first of which is that it aired on a Sunday instead of a Thursday, which is what it typically aired on. The second of which is that that's probably it. It aired immediately following the Super Bowl on the same channel, meaning that anyone who left their TV on after the game was potentially accounted for. The Office is actually pretty similar to The Simpsons now that I think about it. Neither show was expected to succeed. In fact, both were actively set up for failure. They were mid-season replacements, meaning that some other show flopped badly enough for the station to decide that it needed to substitute it out with literally anything else. This is just like being a designated hitter for a baseball team, but instead of having your job be to just hit the ball, your only job is just for no one to care about you whatsoever. It's a brutal death sentence for pretty much any show, although there are occasionally exceptions that find prosperity and step out of their pre-assigned grave. The Office and The Simpsons both lived to see the day. That being said, The Simpsons was way worse off. This show, already doomed to fail in a mid-season replacement slot, about to assume the time slot of an only moderately successful show that just got hiatus due to lying, on a station that nobody cared about, was going to try to tell the story of a dysfunctional American family using an art medium that had not worked successfully on primetime for more than 20 years. Animation just wasn't done. Anyone that worked in the business at this time would tell you that it was going to be the biggest flop that the world would ever see. A primetime adult animation would not be appealing to the American public. They were wrong. Every single one of them was wrong. Take a look at that post-Super Bowl episode of The Office again. 51 episodes of average Simpsons programming earned a naturally higher viewership. This chaotic, sporadic, and immediate attention was so revolutionary that we now have a name for it. Again, remember, Fox was not yet a TV powerhouse. In fact, at the time, there were really only 3 TV networks that mattered. These 3 stations were so synonymous with successful television that they were just simply known as the Big 3. Fox was barely a speck on the radar for them. Yet somehow, and I cannot stress this enough, out of absolutely nowhere, a single TV phenomenon brought Fox to join them. It became competitive with some of the most iconic TV shows of the 90s ever, ones that had the blessing of starting out on a channel that actually mattered. This graph is particularly amusing to me, because people still rewatch Seinfeld and Friends, but that just isn't the case for The Simpsons. Again, it just really would have benefited if it had just stopped while it was ahead. Before anyone knew any better back in 1999, Time both called this show the best TV show of the century, and named Bart as the only fictional character to make its list for the 100 most influential people of the century. It's inherently obvious that people only kept coming back to the show each week because it was truly remarkable. But I should point out, because comedy is subjective, it's something of a rarity to have them consistently score well. Theoretically, that should have made it especially difficult for the writers to assess what would be found amusing for an audience as big as The Simpsons had. Here in red violet are the show's episode ratings. One thing you'll notice about them is that they are incredibly high. They put out multiple 9+ episodes, which is a claim that a surprisingly large number of comedies can't say for themselves their entire run. Here's just some of the ones that didn't, or had very few of them. You can pause it if you'd like. I was going to originally talk about this in depth, but then realized it didn't matter to me. Just take my word on this, The Simpsons creators simply understood what made a character or a joke funny. People loved this stuff. Going strong 8 seasons in, the show seemed unstoppable. I mean, by technical definition, I suppose it still is. It hasn't stopped. It's midway through its 32nd season, and Fox just renewed it for 2 more. Maybe it's more accurate to say that people thought it was incapable of crumbling. I doubt anyone noticed at first, but by the 9th season, most of the original writers had moved on to bigger and better things. Homer Simpson started needing to be more and more obnoxious each episode in order to still stay funny. It was just the little things that eventually started to add up. The show started getting sub 7 out of 10 ratings regularly over 400 episodes ago now. It is shocking how many people are still watching at this point. There's no way a show could survive on ratings this low if they didn't have the legacy that The Simpsons had. You can literally watch as people who are hoping against hope that the nostalgia of this animated sitcom will come back. They give up. It's not coming back. Even if The Simpsons was given back everything that once made it special, it couldn't come back. It's old, and it's tired. It's desperately trying to keep up with trends to stay relevant, and it's missing the mark almost every single time. Okay, that was sad. Back to normal shit. So the graph of viewership and episode ratings are actually pretty correlated here, but as I've explained, that actively usually is not the case. This show is abnormally paralleled, and that's simply because it went on for so long that we can see exactly on the graph where changes had to have happened. We see people who are willing to keep watching the show until they were certain that the glory days had passed, which only occurred to them as the show continued to devolve or stay in place in terms of quality. That's fine, but remember, I'm trying to prove to you that you don't want another season of your favorite TV show, which I'm going to take a wild guess is not The Simpsons. I just used The Simpsons because it had the most obvious correlation between its viewership and episode ratings, which made it easier for me to clearly see what I was missing. It turns out that the parallel between viewership and episode ratings was not the accurate place to look. It never has been. This whole time, it's been viewership and number of ratings per episode. That sounds dumb, I know. I mean, obviously, you can't rate something if you've never seen it. There's no reason that anyone would do that. But remember that restaurant example I showed you? People review things either because it was the best thing they've ever seen, or the worst thing they've ever seen. If you enjoy a show for a good number of episodes, or even seasons, you'll probably have a positive outlook on what the show represented, even if you stopped watching it before it ended. It's hilarious. Television isn't a necessity, and it never has been. Even cell phones, which the media loves to bash for being a ridiculous time waster, have more required application in our lives. All 1.7 billion people who had TV service in the year 2019 bought it explicitly for entertainment. When we watch a TV show, we are actively putting every other opportunity in our life on hold to do so. Every week, our televisions ask us whether or not we're invested enough to keep paying attention to a given story. And as soon as the answer to that question becomes even, kind of, we stop and we find something else to do. We assume that it's because we're busy that week or because there's another show that just came out, but if you truly needed to see it, you'd see it. People have been known to skip work to catch up on shows because, when done correctly, TV is one of the most powerful mediums that the world has ever seen. Simply put, most shows don't deteriorate the way Game of Thrones did like a Mentos and Coke reaction. Instead, they're much more akin to grandma's antacids in a glass of water, slowly and quietly dissolving without a hint. People don't even know what's going on. They assume that it's something internal, that their tastes have changed or something. These people effectively see the show as if it's a rock in a glass of water, not deteriorating at all, and actually possibly better than ever. But if we were to track those people down for their honest opinions, the ratings would indicate that the show was indeed slowly deteriorating. That's not what happens, though, because those people don't vote. Only the people who are still actively interested in what the show has to say write anything at all. Everyone else feels nothing but indifference. Let's take a look at the episode ratings for The Simpsons again. It has a wonderful curve over the first 300 episodes, and then suddenly, the ratings flatline. They have some okay episodes and some terrible episodes, but the average episode rating floats around a 7 for decades? Of course not. If the show was still putting out phenomenal content, people would still be watching. But the people who are increasingly dissatisfied with the show's content will cease to have opinions on the episodes that they don't see. That's why the true indication of public opinion is in the number of people volunteering their time to review a piece of media for no reward. The Simpsons' initial episode debuted to 6,000 different opinions. Now, the first episode usually happens to have the most opinions, regardless of show, but it's especially impressive when you realize that The Simpsons predates the official creation of IMDb by almost a year, meaning that people only got to leave their initial thoughts on the episode well after they had seen it. Actually, that goes for the whole first season of the show. The fact that every single episode had anywhere from a high 3,000 to a high 2,000 ratings kinda screams how crazy people were going for this show. There isn't even a single episode with fewer than 2,000 opinions until 102 episodes in. And even then, 2,000 plus doesn't even stop being a regular thing until the second episode of the 9th season, which was indeed a controversial episode, and definitely was the reason we started getting less opinions. It's nothing that kills the show. Remember, this is The Simpsons, the only immortal family on Earth, and although people's interest is waning, they stay 1,000 votes or higher all the way up until the mid-16th season on episode 342. That's longer than the entire run of Criminal Minds. Note that its viewership is already a third of what it used to be at this point, which in and of itself should be enough for you to say, hey, this show isn't what it used to be. But because Fox's breakout hit show once had as many as 30 million people tuning in live, 1/3 of the viewership is still plenty profitable. It's all the way over here when the show regularly fails to hit even 1,000 different opinions. 21st season, 2009, 20 years out. The show now gets 1/4 the viewership that it once did. Again, make sure you're taking a look at the orange too. It's tragic. There's nothing to stop its fall. Clearly, no one cares. We're 3 decades in now. The show regularly just barely gets over 1 million people watching it in a primetime slot on Sundays, because mediocrity isn't rewarded with so much as a word. It's just simply met with a dwindling fanbase that wishes no ill will against the show that once represented a nice distraction from their own lives. Now that we know this, let's see what we can notice pattern-wise from those 75 graphs from before. All of them were from that top 250 chart that I had before, and they all had to have had at least 40 episodes with viewership rating. Weirdly enough, at the start of pretty much every single chart, the viewership and episode rating parallel each other almost perfectly. They kind of had to, if you think about it. Show business is a crazy expensive and risky industry. The only way a brand new show will be granted renewal is if higher-ups feel like they know that it will continue to be profitable if they do so. Naturally, executives don't care what IMDb says. Sex and the City sucked a fat shit its entire run ratings-wise. Everyone knew that it was trash, but its viewership stayed high enough to warrant 6 seasons, 2 movies, and, as of 2021, a sequel series. Obviously, that's atypical for a scripted show received so poorly to do so well. In reality, to find longevity on a major network, almost every show has to hook the audience with a grade A premise and characters as fast as possible, or everyone will stop watching before the first season even ends. Of course the viewership and episode ratings will look similar at first, but without fail, somewhere along the road, the show will lose its original writers, or lose its director, or its narrative, and in turn, lose its fan base. It's a cycle dictated by capitalism, and it will never, ever die. You don't want another season of your favorite TV show, and you never have. So when one finishes and you find yourself wanting more, take a moment to consciously realize that it's a gift you still feel this way. Because more often than not, you, along with the rest of the community, don't. I personally think that it makes it that much more poetic that the finale is one of the most celebrated episodes for almost every show. Stars that left the show come back, networks promoted a little extra for the send-off, and for a single moment, all the people who were once fans return one last time to see the characters that they loved put to rest. They're happy about it too. I took a look at that top 250 list one last time. I sorted them by average episode rating, and then I compared them to their own finales. Of the 188 shows on my list that already had their finales, only 46 of them weren't actively better than their average episode rating. That is to say that 76% of our favorite shows ended on a note that society agreed was better than usual. Maybe that's partially because finales are simply easier to write, but they're certainly not 76% easier. No, that statistic is entirely man-made. We recognize what the shows were to us, sentimental value and all, and we're endlessly grateful their productions could provide it to us for the time that they did. Yet above all, we recognize one subconscious but fundamental truth. We are so incredibly thankful that it ended. Hi there! Thank you so much for watching this video. It has been a 9-month-long journey for me between all the Excel sheets, the writing the script, the conceptualizing, the graphics, the video editing itself. It has just been a lot. So I thoroughly hope that you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed making it. And if you did, you know where a big red button can be found, right below this video. Also, I'm incredibly grateful that you even chose to stick around as long as you did. This was an hour of time that you just spent, and might I say wisely. But I would also like to reward you with a little fact I found just recently that really helped me. That's completely unrelated to really anything else, but I thought you might enjoy it. I recently found out that if you hit Control-C and then instead of hitting Control-V, you hit Control-Shift-V, it will automatically paste in the same font you were originally typing. So that's great. I hope you can use that. Thank you so much for watching this video once again, and if you stick around, I'll see you soon. Bye!